Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live for a Saturday Q&A. As you can probably tell if you are watching this, I am not at my usual setup. I am at Newport Beach for the weekend. So I apologize in advance for any Wi-Fi or sound issues, but hopefully we'll go off without a hitch today. So joining me, as always, for this Q&A are my guys, Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you, man. Have you recovered from watching the Wimbledon final? How are you doing otherwise?
No, don't care. Don't care about the one who played the Wimbledon final. Sounds good. Steven, it looks like he's being held hostage right now in Newport Beach. As the thing was loading up, it showed his face like darker, like he was one of those 60 minutes like anonymous people while the lighting goes down.
Nice.
So I just imagine like a muffled voice being like,
Yeah, man. If I lean back too much, it goes completely dark. And so I have my phone light on right now and on top of my computer to try and avoid that a little bit, but we'll see how it works. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing?
Doing very well. I have the opposite problem. I'm way too bright. I don't know why the entire side of my face is like that, but I'm going like Phantom of the Opera, Gerard Butler look right now.
Phantom of the Opera. Nice. So, like I said, we are here for a Q&A. We have a couple from our YouTube members that we'll get to. Of course, if you guys in the chat here have anything that you want to make sure you get answered, feel free to use the super chat feature. We'll always be sure to answer those ones, and then hopefully just have a good time talking some football. We are officially 17 days away from training camp, from the opening of training camp. So the beginning of football season is fastly approaching. So Tyler, we'll kick it back to you here for our first question from Chorizo con Papas.
You want me to read them?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Okay. I'll just go in a completely random order because there's 8 of them. So thank you for sending them in. When the Chargers get to the Super Bowl, which team would you most like to see them play?
You know what? I'm going to go with the Buccaneers because even though he doesn't play for the Patriots anymore, I would love to get a victory over Tom Brady, just kind of reverse all the Patriots Brady juju that plagued the Chargers under Phillip Rivers. So I think just from an emotional standpoint, that'd be fun. And the Buccaneers are obviously a very good team. So I'll go with the Bucs.
I'll go Rams. I feel like he was kind of supposed to, there was the idea of it happening last year when the Super Bowl was in LA, but I think that would be a real blockbuster thing for both teams.
Yeah, that's what I'd go with. I don't really have a thing against NFC teams. Like, I would love to beat the Patriots. I'd love to beat the Chiefs, but that's not how Super Bowls work unless we're switching. So, yeah, I think the Rams for me. If we beat them, it'd be great. If we lose, that backfires hard on the Chargers, but hey, I'd rather go beat the Rams if possible.
Yeah, definitely don't have any like hard feelings towards any NFC teams, which is kind of why I went with Tom Brady and all that crew. So good question, appreciate it. We'll get to one from the chat here from Med609. He wants to know if there are any underrated training camp battles that we aren't talking about enough.
It depends if there's really a competition, but I do think if they keep 4 tight ends, that's a camp battle no one's talking about. We're all assuming that they're not keeping 4 tight ends this year because they drafted Xander Horvath, but that doesn't really prevent them from doing that either. So they could keep it again. And like Stone Smart was amazing apparently in minicamp. I think Camp Moyer has a shot as that H-back type. Camp Moyer is a good blocking tight end. So is it an exciting battle? Not really. But if the Chargers keep 4 tight ends, that's a battle we're not even talking about.
Yeah, I'd say that's the one. Aside from that, I don't know if there's not one we're not talking about, but I guess what they decide to do with those last couple cornerback spots will be interesting. Because they've talked about what they want to do with like Jalen Guyton at gunner. So does that take like someone like Keemon Hall totally out of consideration? Probably. I don't know. And then you sort of have a weird amount of picks there. Like we think Jasir Taylor probably makes the roster, but Dean Leonard, he had a couple pass breakups and was supposedly good during minicamp, so maybe he could crack the roster, maybe not. So I'll say how many defensive backs they decide to carry in general, and then which ones those guys are, particularly on the back end of the roster and special teams.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking off of that would be the safety 4 spot after JT
Yeah.
Woods is really an interesting one because Mark Webb only had the one game, only had like the 7 or 8 snaps, and then he got hurt. Lohi Gilman also battled some injuries last year, wasn't a draft pick of this current regime, and after he came back from the injury, he just wasn't really the same player. I know he had that great tackle in Week 18 against the Raiders last year, which kind of maybe hinted at him being back to full speed, if you will. But I think just from a physical profile, I think Mark Webb gives you a little something different in that safety room that Alohi Gilman just can't necessarily do as a bigger body kind of player who can play in the box, cover tight ends ideally. So I'm interested to see what they do there with Webb and Gilman. Do they keep both because Webb's kind of recovering from the injury, bringing back slowly? That's, I think, something that is worth keeping an eye on through training camp for sure.
What was Gilman playing through again? I think he said it after the season. It was
a torn quad, I think.
I believe it was a quad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I can't even imagine how that would feel like.
Yeah.
All right, Tyler, let's get to our next one from our YouTube members.
Okay, this one is from Steven, who's also in the chat. Scenario, it is 4th and 10, and the defense is on the field. If they get the stop, they win. Which 11 defenders do you want out there, and how would you want them lined up? I can type your answers if that helps.
I'd go with a dime package. I'd go 4 down linemen, 1 linebacker, ideally Drew Tranquil. So defensive lineman, I'd go with obviously Bosa, Mack, and then I'll put Morgan Fox on the inside and Sebastian Joseph Day. And then DBs, I'll go with the 3 safeties, Durwin, Nas, JT Woods, and then Asante, JC Jackson, and Bryce Callahan.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Only situation where I think that's maybe a little different is if you're playing like the Chiefs or Raiders, and then you probably maybe throw Michael Davis in there, depending on when you're lining up. Yeah, that's kind of. But I mean, yeah, that kind of depends on like every team you're playing. We could like tweak this a little bit and have like one more linebacker depending on who you're playing, or one more corner. So I have no problem with that list. I think it's fine. Interesting discussion, I guess, would be Tillery versus Fox, because I'm leaning towards Fox.
Interesting to me.
I mean, it's not interesting, but depending on what day I'm getting Jerry Tillery, and if he's firing like he was in like the Kansas City game from a couple of years ago, like maybe I consider putting him in, but generally I probably side with Fox still.
Yeah, no, if we're playing the Chiefs or the Bengals, I'm sliding in Tillery for 3 downs a game.
Yeah, those 2 good games a year.
Yeah.
I think if you want to get a little crazy, you could put Kyle Van Noy in for Sebastian Joseph Day and kick Joey Bosa on the inside and Khalil Mack on the inside. Especially if it's 4th and 10, you kind of assume they're passing, so get a little wild up front.
I suppose you could put in Kyle Van Noy over Tranquil, but I don't know. Let's see what they. Yeah, could be fun.
What about if it was 4th and 29?
Oh, jeez. You have to go there, man. You have to go there.
That's an undefeated play, so there's nothing we can do. I can
shout
another
out
one
Tyler's
from
dad for the super chat.
Yes, thank you, Dad. Thank you. I hope the Raiders win one more game for that. Thank you. We do have one actually on Patreon from Frank Blakely, who asks, do you think Durwin has a shot at MVP if he has 5 sacks, 5 interceptions, defense is top 5, and we make the playoffs?
No, because the quarterback will never not win the MVP award.
Yeah, I would say defensive player for sure.
Yeah.
MVP, I feel like, I mean, we talked about wide receiver rankings last week, right? And Cooper Kupp did something that we haven't seen in like 20 years. And he got like 2 MVP votes, I think it was.
Was it really?
So, yeah. I think
it's just straight up impossible. Like in this current era with how we're passing the ball and how many like great quarterbacks there are, I just don't think it's going to happen. Like I don't even think you could get like a one-off Sean Alexander, like LT kind of year. I honestly don't think that can happen now, even if you go to like the wide receiver position, because then the credit's going to go to the quarterback, that wide receiver usually, which, then you have like a Stafford MVP or something like that. Yeah. So I don't know. I also just don't think a defensive player can win. If Aaron Donald has it, damn sure won an MVP by now. Right. I just I don't think it's going to happen.
Are you and Chorizo on the same page there? I mean, there was, I want to say it was 2014 when Aaron Rodgers won the MVP, and people all season long were debating between him and JJ Watt. And JJ Watt had, like 20 tackles for loss and like 20 sacks and like this crazy season. Mm-hmm. And Aaron ended up getting like 35 out of 50 votes or something like that. So it's just so hard for non-quarterbacks for the MVP. But defensive player, if he has that kind of season, he's definitely in that conversation. Obviously, kind of depends on who else is doing what. I think defensive player of the year is really focused more towards the pass rushers, not to the same scale of MVP and quarterbacks. But if Durwin has that kind of season, but Joey Bosa has 18 and a half sacks, then I think people would kind of lean towards Joey Bosa on his own team.
So just looking back, so Gilmore won it in 2019. If we're talking about DBs, after that, the next one was Troy Polamalu in 2010. So I mean, it's
so
possible.
two in the last 12 years or 11 years, I guess.
Yeah. So 2 since 2010, although 3 since 2009. You got Charles Woodson. So all you have to do is be Charles Woodson or Troy Polamalu, and you'll win.
I mean, we also just had TJ Watt come up a half sack of breaking Strahan's record, and I don't think he got like any consideration really for the MVP. Not that I'm saying he should have, but I just think it's so hard as a defensive player or offensive player at this point. That's not a quarterback.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a side note off of this conversation. Do you guys think the NFL would ever do like more awards?
Probably.
Like what, point. I guess.
Well, because these awards, we're talking about are generally so skewed towards quarterbacks and pass rushers.
Right.
But I mean, we could probably find some great seasons over the last 2 decades that, a cornerback has had or a safety has had that probably should have merited a defensive player of the year award or a receiver for MVP or something like that.
They don't have like a Jim Thorpe like college award for like best DB or whatever. So, I mean, I think they should do that. I think like best DB, best offensive skill position or something. I don't know. I guess it's offensive player of the year, but
well, that gets interesting into positions because that kind of gets into like all pro territory because like that is kind of an award in of itself. And like when it comes to like Hall of Fame time, we always debate, how many all pros guys have, how many all pros they don't. So I don't know. That's not technically like an award, but I'm sure the NFL could make up awards if they want to. MVP and all of those awards they can make up and have a 3-hour show like the NBA does for their awards.
Right. Mm-hmm. No, I was just thinking about this because I don't know if you guys saw the conversation on Twitter that was happening between Jalen Ramsey, Aqib Talib, and Richard Sherman. Mm-hmm. All 3 guys who had some great seasons in the last decade. And I mean, like, of course, they were all pros or second team all pro, but then when you compare that kind of resume to, like what Aaron Donald has and what JJ Watt has, and obviously, it's just kind of different conversation, right? When you're looking at JJ Watt, who was a 3-time defensive player of the year, Aaron Donald 4, I think at this point. And then it's like Jalen Ramsey, 2-time first team all pro. It's like, doesn't really reflect how good of a player he is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I was just thinking about that the other day.
Yeah. Chat, what do you think about Derwin James being voted outside the top 10 by one NFL executive?
There were a lot of those though. If you saw that, like the DT list, the weird list that they did with cornerbacks, like just in general, it was all over the place. I think I read like Edge, and there was a guy that had Max Crosby outside his top 10. There was one that had Chandler Jones like still in the top 3. So I don't know. That's just a weird. I feel like if you poll 70 people, you'll probably find one guy who's willing to leave Derwin James out of the top 10. But I don't know.
Yeah, Nick Bosa's lowest ranking was 10.
Which is like unbelievable.
And, like, please name 10 or 9 edge rushers better than Nick Bosa. Like, what are we doing here? So, I don't know. I was joking with one of the guys from Chargers Wire about it, and he was like, sometimes I feel like my evaluations of these players are just so off, and then I read these articles that some NFL executive has 10 safeties better than Durwin James or 9 edge rushers better than Nick Bosa, and it's like, okay, I feel good about myself now.
Yeah, that and someone said Drake London was like Keenan Allen.
Yeah,
an executive said that. I'm like, come on, like, no, they're not. So I think people are just trolling at this point. Like, if people just get asked and they just troll. There's no way you could believe that.
I think Jalen Ramsey's lowest ranking was like 8 because Jamar Chase like burned him on one play. The guy was like, yeah,
one of the greatest wide receiver rookie seasons ever, if not ever. Happens to burn him once.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tyler. We'll do another member question, and then we'll get to a chat question that I want to bring up.
Yeah, let me go to a member question from NV Talent. I have a 2-parter. Are there any Chargers games you wish you could have seen live? And then same question, but just not the Chargers. There's another game you would have liked to see live that's not the Chargers.
I mean, so many games, right? Philip Rivers was obviously talking with the guys at the Senior Bowl Hall of Fame thing, and he mentioned the playoff game against the Colts, the overtime playoff game. I think that would obviously be, at least in my lifetime, like obviously I would have loved to go to the AFC Championship game back in 1994, but I was still not on this earth. So a little before my time, a few days actually. But in my lifetime, I think the playoff game against the Colts that went to overtime, it would be at the top of my list.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. Oh, man, what the games?
Yeah, I would go Colts walk-off. That's a big one. I'll go Chargers Chiefs 2018. I mean, I know that's not a home Chargers game, but, Thursday Night Football, primetime, football weather, the whole thing, and, that comeback coming as quickly as it did. I think that would have been a really fun one to attend. Could also go to the Steelers game same year for that kind of same vibe. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them. But, yeah, Colts Sproles would probably be my first choice.
I would have liked to see, well, actually, honestly, Herbert's first game, because that would have been insane to be sitting in the stands. We never were able to go to that game. We didn't go to any games that year, but that would have been so cool to just be sitting in those stands. All of a sudden, Herbert's on the field, rushing touchdown. I don't think I went to Rivers' last home game. I feel like I should have, but I didn't. I must have missed. I would have loved to go to that.
Was that
because
Raiders 2019 then?
Maybe.
No.
Or was that year?
I don't remember what that year was.
No, his last game was at Kansas City, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I remember that because they lost.
And I really want to get to a game at Arrowhead.
I know.
I think his last home game was the Broncos. I don't know if that's true.
It might have been.
Because I think the Raiders that year. Oh no, I'm mixing up seasons. No, I'm thinking of Herbert in that.
So
Raiders on Thursday night.
Last home game was Oakland, and then last game was Kansas City away. One quick thing, I wouldn't call this set in stone, but I would buy it. Anything new on a Durwin James extension? When could it be announced? I think it'll be announced around training camp because that's kind of how it's been. Yeah. But there is a number floating around from a couple of people. So I think we do know what the APY is, just not the timetable. But I think it'll be around training camp.
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously that thing about Jesse Bates and Jeremy Fowler's tweet yesterday about them not likely being close to an extension. So that's obviously something to keep an eye on. I think the deadline for that to happen is coming up this week, if I'm not mistaken, since he's on the franchise tag. So we'll see if that number ends up changing, if the Bengals are able to kind of, work some magic there with Jesse Bates or not. But yeah, I would expect it to happen before they hit the field on the first day of training camp for sure. That's kind of like the late point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same with Joey Bosa. So I would look for the number to be around what Arjun said, but the number we have is not from Arjun. But I would say look for what Arjun posted about his contract breakdown.
There we go. Question from Roy Leggett that I wanted to get to earlier. This is for Stephen Manningweather. I appreciate that. Obviously, O-line masterminds is this week. Wish I could have been there. That'd be amazing. We all know what is our weak link along the offensive line. If the coaches refuse to move Matt Filer to tackle, why not switch him to right guard to aid whoever is the liability at tackle? I think this is a really interesting question. Obviously, you're going to start Zion at one of the guard spots, and theoretically you hope that he can kind of help that tackle. But obviously you're talking about Matt Filer being, a much better player at this point in their careers. So I think this is an interesting conversation. It really kind of comes down to continuity and where players are comfortable, because it's really hard to explain like how hard it is to switch sides along the offensive line when Matt Filer has played right tackle and left guard. So I don't know. There's a really weird dynamic there potentially where maybe Matt Filer's not super comfortable playing right guard, but he is at left guard. And then also, I think one of the points that Daniel Popper has pointed out, various times, is that the Chargers view the left side of their offensive line with Slater, Filer, Lindsey as a true weapon on offense, and they don't really want to break that up. So I think it's an interesting idea. Obviously, getting Slater and Zion next to each other will be a whole lot of fun. But I think the Chargers really want to keep continuity as much as possible along the offensive line, first and foremost.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I've been watching the whole offense up through the Denver game now. Granted, I'm only watching wide receivers. Boy, watching Matt Filer, Slater, Lindsey, that side work, it's a thing of beauty. So I don't blame them for not breaking that up. It's incredible. So they just got to make that right side work somehow.
Yeah,
there we go. There's my lighting. My lighting went like completely dark for a second there.
I think I'm fine with keeping the left side as it is. If you want to change the right side, you probably could put Filer there, but like that, then what level of player are you getting out of rookie Zion Johnson from the jump at that spot that they've already talked about how they like left side as much, right? So I really don't see much of a difference it would make. I think at this point you kind of also create a hole there too. Not that I'm saying Zion is like a hole in the same way that Trey Pipkins and Storm Norton are, but starting from this point in the year, I just wouldn't mess with the chemistry they have on that left side.
So the Chargers have, I'm just looking at explosive runs over 10 yards from the right guard over. So right guard, right tackle, and then outside, they have 5 explosive runs of 10 or more yards. Left side, left guard, left tackle, and off to the outside, they have 21. So yeah, they want to keep that left side intact.
Yeah, which totally makes sense. All right, Tyler, any other member questions or Patreon questions?
Patreon, no. Member questions, we have about 7 more from Chorizo con Papas, but maybe we'll
shout out Chorizo, man. I appreciate it.
For sure. Fast forward, let's go one more from him. Fast forward to next offseason. We just won the Super Bowl. Which pending free agents get re-signed, and what are our top 5 draft needs?
All right.
Right tackle.
Quite the question.
Again. I can put that in the chat.
I need to figure out. I haven't looked at the free agent list extensively yet.
Well, if it's a draft pick, that's not a first rounder. They're not getting re-signed. So there's that.
I'll say cornerback because they probably cut Michael Davis and then Bryce Callahan's on a 1-year deal. So if you want to, Asante's still on his rookie deal, and obviously you signed JC, but I'll say slot corner depth in general probably becomes like the biggest concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, it'll be wide receiver again. That'll be the popular one, I'm sure. I'm sure mock drafts already have them taking wide receiver for the millionth year in a row. Sorry
to cut you off there. Some quick free agent list. Obviously, Durwin, but that'll be taken care of in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Kyle Van Noy, interesting one. Bryce Callahan, depending on how he is healthy or not. Morgan Fox, Nasir Adderley, Troy Reader, Jerry Tillery. Jalen Guyton is an interesting one to talk about. DeAndre Carter, depending on how that goes. J.K. Scott, Trey Pipkins, Donald Parham. That's pretty much it in terms of starters, right? Then you get into Forrest Merrill, Ben DeLuca, that group of undrafted free agents.
Sure.
Easton Stick is a free agent, so Daniel Popper seems to think that he's the long-term backup. So I assume that Stick would be resigned on a cheap deal.
Sure, I'm happy for him.
No one that really strikes me as priority aside from Durwin, which they're going to get done this offseason. So then I think it's just the margins, right? If Jalen Guyton has a real breakout year and has 800 yards, then he's probably going to walk somewhere else, and you can afford to resign him. If he's more somewhere and closer to where he has been his whole career, then you probably can get him back, right? So I think it's just about attacking those margins and seeing which players can still be affordable. I wouldn't be surprised if Troy Reader ends up back for another year just because of the state of the linebacker group. That seems like fine, continuity thing there. But I think that's really getting into like how based off of what they do in 2022 territory, obviously.
Yeah, the biggest one for me that I'm kind of going to be keeping an eye on is obviously with Nasir Adderley. And, he's somebody that I will continue to talk about being underrated last year. And, I've been watching the defense from last season. I'm only 4 games in, but watching the mental leap that Nasir Adderley took last year was really like a great thing to see on a week-to-week basis, just making plays that he was not making in 2020, just seeing and reacting so much faster. Obviously would love him to be able to come down with some more interceptions, be able to get a grip more on his tackling rate, missed tackle rate, excuse me. But if he has the season that I kind of think he has or can have, then it's going to be tough for me to be able to watch him walk, and it'd be a very similar feeling to Nasir Adderley, but obviously to a little bit of a different situation because they drafted JT Woods, they're extending Derwin James.
Right.
But I would love to have Nasir Adderley back if he does have the season I think he will have. But it's just going to be so tough to keep him and make his contract kind of work with where they're at financially and with the way that they drafted the last 2 years with Woods and Webb.
They're under or over almost 14 million in cap next year.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that bad.
They're in the red right now quite a bit. I think the cap will go up, so that will change.
Okay.
But they're going to have to restructure quite a few people in order to free up some cap space to sign some key free agents back and make some other additions too.
A couple of people have brought up Josh Palmer. What do you guys think? Over under 50 catches, 750 yards.
Under.
I would say of the two, I would say over 50 catches is more likely. 750 yards, like you'd have to have some kind of injury in front of him for that to happen. But I could see him getting, like 51, 52 catches or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's just going to depend on how the offense runs, because we sort of talked about the 3A, 3B relationship with Guyton. If the offensive line stays healthy and they still have a chance to take more deep shots and Guyton is still getting fed, then I probably would go under. Maybe the two things aren't of like that much relation, but I think last year you had Guyton with 31 catches, Palmer with 33, and Guyton obviously kind of heated up towards the end of the season. So yeah, I think it just depends on what their offense is and what they're able to do on offense. If the offensive line stays relatively healthy and they're able to take more deep shots, I'd probably say under on Palmer for that reason.
Yeah, a couple of people. I do want to bring this up. Is Josh Palmer the perfect Keenan replacement when the time comes to move on? He's the Mike Williams replacement. I'll be completely honest. Watching them and the way they rotated so far last year, they were definitely preparing for Josh Palmer to potentially be Mike Williams' replacement, and they'd bring in KJ Hill and Jalen Guyton more for Keenan Allen. So I actually think that Josh Palmer is Mike Williams' replacement.
Yeah, I think with projecting Palmer in like his best case scenario, right? He is somebody that you could move around a little bit more, but I mean, obviously Keenan Allen is so much more of a slot receiver. He can go on the outside, of course, but I think they're looking for that true X receiver in this offense, and I think that's what Palmer's role is going to be. after they move on from Mike Williams at some point.
Possibly. Super chat from Michael Lopez. Who's the surprise cut in training camp this year? We do it every year. Who's it going to be?
So for it to be a surprise, I mean, like I think, at this time last year, had we known that Tyron Johnson was going to be cut, I don't know really how surprised we would be. It wasn't until we saw what happened at training camp that really made him like a surprise cut because he was playing so well and being so explosive. So I think some of that depends. I think a real surprise for me, if depending how the rookies show up, would be them cutting Michael Davis a year early, maybe. We've heard that the coaching staff isn't super high on him anymore. Maybe they just decide to, cut that dead weight this year as opposed to waiting towards next year. I think right now that would be kind of like my only real surprise.
Yeah. Depends how they feel about the guys behind him. Right. I don't really see why, but I think it would be Drew Tranquil.
Oh.
That would be very
unfortunate. That'd be a real surprise and very unfortunate.
Because we know Murray's starting.
Let me get this.
Troy Reader legitimately might be the starter opposite him. I don't think so. Like, again, this is a surprise. I mean, you have Nick Neiman. If you want to hang on to Ogbong Bamiga and you only want to keep 4 linebackers, and you have Kyle Van Noy, and Drew Tranquil is really not your guy, and he's not that healthy, maybe him. I mean, he started camp last year as the 3rd linebacker. So it's not like they loved him into training camp last year and had big plans for him. He just outplayed Murray, and Murray got hurt. So maybe him.
I'd say Jerry Tillery would be the surprise. I know that sounds weird to say because people have called him bad, obviously, and we've had several, I feel like, roster predictions that have left Jerry Tillery out, or have not necessarily left him out, but had him on the bubble. But it would be a very un-Telesco-like move, I think, to move on from Jerry Tillery in quite a dramatic way for a former first-round pick, even though he hasn't lived up to that billing. So I would say Tillery is a possible one. I still don't think it's going to happen because you don't have anyone else other than Morgan Fox as a pass rushing interior guy. Yeah,
if they decided to cut Drew Tranquil, I would be very concerned about the future of this linebacker room. That would be a tough one to swallow. I don't know if it would be necessarily a surprise, but I am going to hate in the moment that they choose Christian Covington over Braden Fehoko because I mentioned, going back and watching, Christian Covington was awful last year in the first 4 games that I studied, and talking about like being as bad as like Eric Banks and Jerry Tillery against the run. So if they choose him over Braden Fehoko, I'm going to be very, very upset.
Yeah,
Jerry Tillery. I'll just say Jerry Tillery kind of helped Christian Covington dodge some of the fire from criticism, because there were quite a few games where the two linked up in terms of how bad they were. The Eagles game is kind of an example of that one, where Tillery ended up having a bad game with Covington. So yeah, I do think that he doesn't get enough smoke from Chargers Twitter. Then again, Tillery was a first-round pick, and Christian Covington is playing for the minimum, so there's that. Mm-hmm. But I do think he dodges some of the criticism there.
Yeah, so kind of an extension of that conversation about the defensive tackles. Steven also wants to know, is Tito Ogbonia more of a Tillery spot, or is he more Johnson / Sebastian Joseph Day? I've talked about this a little bit, and Tyler has as well. So, Tyler, where are you at with how would you kind of employ Tito this year as a rookie?
Oh, good question. Is he more of a Tillery or Johnson Sebastian Joseph Day? I suppose he's more of a Tillery. I see him as I currently see him more of a pass rusher. I certainly wouldn't want him as a nose by any means. I even watched him go against a couple centers, one being Nick Ford, one being Donovan West, and he got his ass kicked by those guys. I think him being more of a gap shooter as your 3-tech sort of guy might work best for him. But I haven't watched a ton of him to really make a judgment. I know Steven's watched more of him.
Yeah, so I think for me, I would kind of put these 3 defensive tackles, Tillery, Johnson, and Sebastian Joseph Day, in different categories. Because I know Sebastian Joseph Day, for me, is kind of a jack of all trades because he can play, 1 through 5 essentially, meaning he can play in front of the center, he can play in front of the guards, and he can play in front of tackles from time to time. So for me, like that's kind of the best case scenario for Otito, is somebody that could do a little bit of everything. Austin Johnson to me is your starting nose tackle, and the furthest I would put him out is 3 tech against the guards. So like Tyler said, I'm not necessarily putting Tito against as the nose right away. Maybe he can develop that in his game, but right now I would have him be more of a 3 and a 5 tech. So I guess kind of more of a Tillery, although very different body types for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of broad categories. I would say he's like somewhere between like a Tillery and a Justin Jones, maybe, like kind of from last year.
Sure.
So yeah, like certainly not a run stopper, but he doesn't fit that like Tillery persona either. So I feel like he's a little bit in the middle, but I don't know.
Yeah. Good question, though. I think if everybody's healthy, obviously you're going to see them be pretty, deliberate with easing Tito into the rotation, very similar to how they did with Chris Rumpf, where you'll see him get a series here or there. You're not going to see him be like a starter by any means, unless obviously injuries happen. But I'm excited to see what happens there. NFL is lit wants to know, what's one thing you guys want to see from the coaching staff this season? Alex, you want to take this one first?
Is there an obvious? I don't know. Is there an obvious one what we would want to see from the coaching staff? The stereotypical offensive thing is more deep shots, right? Like that. That's the easy one. I guess I'm most curious to see roster cut decisions, even though that's not like a game plan thing or like what they're going to do there. But we saw some of them last year. They were surprising. I'm curious to see if they're going to be as surprising this year, and the emphasis on Ryan Ficken being the new special teams coordinator, and if that creates a lot of change from the Darius Swinton special teams picks era, which certainly put the Chargers behind the 8 ball last year. So I'm curious to see what they're going to do in terms of making those roster decisions to help special teams. It's kind of a boring one, but like we kind of know what Brandon Staley is, and we kind of know what Joe Lombardi is too. So I think Brian Ficken's influence on the special teams is kind of the wild card.
Yeah, that's a good one. Just watching the receivers so far, actually they did this. So Keenan Allen, I had him graded at like his best route was post corner. Like that combo was amazing for him. By far the best between Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. That was before the bye. Started watching after the bye. The combo he ran more than anything else after the bye was post corner. Like they really increased that for Keenan Allen. So I'd like to see them work with that a little bit more. I don't know how that works schematically. I'll get into the offensive calls after this, but just seeing them take that, like that thing that he did the best, and then do more of it right after the bye is great. So you can use Keenan Allen to attack downfield. I would love for them to finally find a right tackle, because I can't believe how bad the right side was at certain points last season, and I can't believe we still don't have a right tackle, because that was by far the thing that's been make it struggle the most. But whatever. What else? Get Donald Parham involved.
Yeah, good one. I think for me, like roster construction is really just like the overarching theme that I need to see this coaching staff improve upon. Like, last year you're keeping 4 running backs, you're keeping 4 tight ends and a fullback, you're keeping 5 defensive tackles, keeping 5 linebackers. So I think the roster construction just needs to be more flexible at positions of premium need, right? Like I need to see that wide receiver 5 have a role on offense and not just be a returner only kind of player. So there are some things like that I think for sure need to be improved upon.
I also am at the point where I think I'd love for them to cross the 50 before they always go for it on 4th down, unless it's obviously a required situation. I get the numbers and I even support it and everything. I have a really hard time when it's at the 23 or the 18 or something, unless you absolutely need to and it's a requirement.
Yeah, I think just from our health perspective, that would be nice too.
The 4th down from the 23-yard line, that's still a little bit of a rough one. I'll say in response to that, and the thing I'm most curious to see, I don't know if I would say want to either way in terms of what Staley's going to do on 4th down, because he's going to have his opponents on that for the rest of his career, and he's going to have his his supporters on that. But I'll say what the response is in year 2 to all of the criticism and all the media narrative that's been made about it, and how that affects his decision making. Not that I'm saying it will, but I do think that's kind of the human element to talk about. But from the Raiders game, obviously, it gets a lot of criticism from that. Even though I think all three of us are mostly supportive of his moves there, outside of the one from the 23. So I'll be curious to see how he changes some of his philosophy about that, if at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good one. Good question here from Adhere Cotter. He wants to know if it's more likely for the offense to be the best offense in the league or for the defense to get into the top 5 conversation.
Offense.
It already was.
Yeah, I think you're just relying on too many things for defense, right? I mean, health is a huge one, and Chargers were one of the luckier healthy teams last year, but that linebacker group is really tough if you're going to have a top 5 defense, particularly against the run. It will certainly be better than what it was last year, no doubt. But, I mean, anytime – it's also just the fact that you have Justin Herbert, who's a top 5 quarterback, and anytime you have that on a team, then it makes it immediately more likely that – your offense will be, top 5. Or I guess in this case, we're debating number 1 or defense top 5, but I think it's still much more likely that the number 1 offense than the top 5 defense.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the metric, right? The offense is pretty consistently in that top 5 conversation. So for them to go from 5, 4, 6, whatever the range is, to number 1 is not necessarily a huge jump. And we've seen from across the last 15 years that offense it's so much more sustainable than it is for a defense to consistently be good. So there's obviously a chance the Chargers get into a top 5, but I would definitely bank on the Chargers getting into number 1 as opposed to defense getting into top 5. I think for me, the expectations for the defense would be in that top 10 to 12 conversation as opposed to like legitimately top 5. If they are top 5, obviously great. But I think from an expectation standpoint, I'm not expecting them to go from bottom 5 to top 5. I just don't think that's super realistic.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'll take top 16. Like if you're just in the top half of the league, I'm good with that. If the offense is top 7, defense is top 16, and the special teams is like
top 30.
Yeah, that'd be great. 25. Yeah. Top 25, baby. Let's do
it. Same conversations that we had for special teams last year. Just don't be bottom 5 and we're good. We'll take it.
Love it.
Ross Ackerman, a question about go ahead. We'll answer that question first. Yeah.
Okay, from LA Chargers fan. Realistic expectations for this season. I expect a wild card berth and 1 playoff win. Thanks for the content, gentlemen.
I think that's really fair.
That's pretty that's a pretty good one. That's pretty fair.
I think that's a reasonable one, and the wild card is really tough at this point, right? Because the margins that separate 5 through 7 are really hard. So that's the difference between, I don't know, playing the Chiefs potentially in the first round, or are you playing like one of the AFC South teams, which no disrespect to them, but I would rather play like the 4 seed AFC South than the Colts than the Bills or the Ravens or the Chiefs. So, I mean, it all just depends on kind of the luck of the draw there and what teams are clumped. If we're saying the Chargers are getting a wild card spot, I think the division is still realistic, and many fans still think it is a possibility. I do think it is as well, but I would certainly bet more on wildcard berth, 1 playoff win. But, if you do get 1 playoff win, then things can obviously kind of snowball from there, as we've seen from some of the luckier playoff teams in recent years.
Yeah. I think if you're talking about anything less than this, then I think the season is a failure. So I think if you make the playoffs, win a playoff game, you can talk about the season being a success. You're taking that step forward towards building a long-term contender with Justin Herbert and things like that. So I think that's a realistic expectation. I think obviously the Chargers could have a much higher ceiling, if you will. Like I think there is, a good conversation to be had about them winning the division potentially, getting a top 3 seed in the AFC. But for me, like the absolute bare minimum I need to see for this season to be a success is make the playoffs and win a playoff game. So I think that's totally fair. So Ross, I love how many questions we get anytime we do one of these about Xander Horvath, the Chargers fullback. He says, do you think Xander Horvath's RAS score holds weight at the next level? is there a correlation between RES and fullback success?
If Gabe Neighbors' RES score is high, then the correlation is no. So Kyle Juszczyk's was 9.79 for fullback. So that's definitely one. Please don't make me go through these fullback names and remember who these people are.
I would
who's another good one?
Tyler could go through the whole list of fullbacks. I would assume though that there probably is a correlation of RES score. I mean, there's a very similar trend amongst running backs where like over 50% of like Pro Bowlers have had like above like an 8 RAS score or something like that. So for the running backs, so I would imagine it's probably similar for fullbacks, although you do have fullbacks that are conventionally good and probably like bottom 10 fullbacks in the league, but they have like 1.5 RAS scores. So
bottom 10 fullbacks, that's an interesting conversation because I think maybe like 15 teams maybe use a fullback.
Where's that list, Fowler?
I think it just kind of depends on the role that you're asking that player to come into, because I think, Steven Anderson as kind of that H-back fullback hybrid, his RAS score wasn't exactly elite and he was able to be successful, but obviously he's not Kyle Juszczyk. So
right.
Just kind of depends really what your expectations are for that specific role and that player. I think the RAS score that will definitely hold some weight for him being a highly effective special teams player, because that's kind of what they're banking on right now. Like, right, that's kind of why they're choosing Horvath over Neighbors potentially, likely, because Neighbors is not very good on special teams. So I guess we'll see, right? Like, depends how creative they want to be with Horvath at the next level.
Yeah, Lorenzo Neal's RAS score was 3.28. So it just depends on the kind of fullback. Yeah.
What was Mike Allstott's RAS score? Just curious.
You considered a fullback or a running back?
I don't know. I would assume fullback.
Why is this fair? You just keep talking off.
Okay.
It's a little slow on the RES website.
Derek Watt was 7.65. Okay. It's good to know.
It's a little higher than I thought, but
Patrick
Ricard was 9.51.
Wow. Okay.
There you go. But Ricard too, I feel like he's probably, off the top of my head, the best AFC fullback, but he was a defensive tackle first. So that's that's a really weirdly specific role that he kind of came into. So I get, like I said, it just kind of depends. But obviously Horvath having such a high RAS is definitely a good thing.
I mean, we should really petition and push for the Chargers to have a top 10 fullback in an era where nobody cares about fullback. We should really push it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll take one more question here to wrap it up, because I think this is obviously relevant to what we've been talking about.
Don't even get me started.
Tyler's the one who's waded himself into these waters.
Kareem says, I'm late, but why the hell do you think they won't make Justin Jackson RB3 or 2B even? Lowering his snap count could reduce his injuries, and we'd have the best RB3 in the league. So Tyler, I'll give you the floor here, man.
What is wrong with people? What is Twitter like? Okay, so I understand like why you'd be concerned about his availability. I totally get that, but people are like, he's unrosterable. So, Kareem, if you're not even on Twitter, you're not even referencing Twitter, my bad. But I'm referencing Twitter. Yes, I know he's not on the team. People are talking about bringing him back. What are people talking about? He's unrosterable. He's not available. He's good. And he played 13 games last year. His last 4 games, he had 342 total yards. He's like one of the only guys who showed up against that Houston game, showed up against Kansas City. I think he scored against the Raiders as well, whatever. Like, people did watch Kelly and Roundtree play last year, right? They do know that Roundtree has -1 receiving yards, right? Like, in almost every category, Kelly and Roundtree are like bottom 5. It's not even like they're in the middle and like they'll get better because year 2, year 3, whatever. No, like, they're like bottom 5. And Justin Jackson is top 10. People are like, Justin Jackson's unrosterable because he's not reliable. Like, no, come on. Like, like, availability is important. And I think that's why they took Spiller, because you can't trust Justin Jackson to be RB2. But like, at some point, ability and being good at football should matter. And I'm not going to take okay, imagine it's a magic wand. I could play football and I was available for 17 games. You'd want me on the roster because I'm more available over Justin Jackson. He plays 12 games, 13 games. No,
I think it would be very quick to the point where you would be unavailable.
We're playing a magic wand here. Okay. It's a very, very magic special wand. I hate this. Everybody, he's glass. I don't want him on the team. But Mike Williams extension, Durwin James extension. No, those guys are hurt all the time too. I get that it's running back, but Justin Jackson's making $1 million maybe on this team as an RB3. People are so adamant about him being unrosterable, and I don't get it. The running backs on this team after Austin Eckler last year were terrible, bad, bottom 5. Imagine Storm Norton at right tackle. Okay, but those guys at running back, that's how bad it is. And we don't want Justin Jackson. Someone's like, oh, we don't want another Jason Verrett. If you told me Jason Verrett could play 13 games right now and as CB6, screw it. I'll do it. Put him on the roster. There's no reason to not have him on the roster. If he loses training camp, he loses. If he gets hurt, he's out. But people are so much he's unrosterable. Yeah, RB3, RB4, whatever.
Yeah,
put him on the team.
We're not asking him to be, RB1, and that's a fantastic rant, by the way. I have to give you a good golf clap there at least. So it's a very similar conversation to Bryce Callahan, right? Bryce Callahan, people are talking about him being a steal and being a great player for this team and being a starter. I mean, the man has played 12 games in the last 3 years. So again, we're not asking for Justin Jackson to come in and be RB1, not even RB2. Just give me RB3. Give me somebody that I can rely upon. Good special teams player, catch the ball out of the backfield, actually is athletic and has some vision and juice to him. So I think Justin Jackson as your RB3 would be a perfect situation. I would feel great about a Eckler, Spiller, Justin Jackson running back trio, and then Xander Horvath as your fullback. So I would be very happy with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real answer to this question is that the league just ends up churning through running backs, and when they're done with their rookie contract, then it's time for Larry Roundtree and Joshua Kelly until they're done with their rookie contract and then replaced. So it is kind of a conveyor belt of just going through that position in the league. I would love to bring him back, but I just don't think at this point it's going to happen. And Tyler said, for a guy who is top 20, top 10 in so many statistics at his position, and had his career year last year. I mean, I know he was hurt for part of it. It's weird that he's not on a roster, which was my first tweet originally in general. I didn't even say, oh, he should be on the Chargers roster. Just 32 rosters. Every team has 5 running backs. You're telling me Justin Jackson isn't top 160, right? That was kind of just my thought on that. So I certainly think he should be on someone's roster. I think for a lot of reasons, particularly the injury bug, but also just the rookie contracts they have on that roster space in general. Don't think it'll happen, but obviously would love if Justin Jackson be brought back and we don't have to think about Joshua Kelly and Larry Roundtree anymore. That'd be awesome. But
I think it's just a competition thing too. It's you don't have to settle for trying to figure out Kelly Roundtree or trying to figure out if one of these undrafted free agents is better than them. It's you had a good, reliable option as your RB3. Just bring him in for competition at minimum. So that's kind of how I feel about the right tackle spot. That's how I felt about edge before they signed Kyle Van Noy. So hopefully they get this situation figured out. So all right, good Q&A today, guys. Really appreciate all the great questions. Like I said, we are 17 days away from training camp, so we'll have a bunch more content coming up, and we'll talk to you guys at that point. Tyler, Alex, any final thoughts before we head out for the day?
Yes, I want to bring this up. Oh, hold on, let me bring it down. Okay, Mike Tolbert's RAS score is higher than Larry Roundtree's. Good night. By a lot.
Oh my gosh. All right. That's a great way to end that. So Tyler, appreciate it. Alex, appreciate it. Appreciate all the questions, all the support. We'll talk to you guys later.